The obsidian walls of the Grand Synod of the Ethelgard Dominion seemed to absorb the very light of the stars that burned cold and distant beyond the transparasteel dome, a crushing darkness that stood as a testament to 10,000 cycles of unbroken rule. Here, in the heart of the Citadel of Whispers, the air was recycled so perfectly it tasted sterile, stripped of all scent and life, leaving only the metallic tang of high-energy shielding and the pheromonal undertones of fear that no amount of atmospheric scrubbing could entirely remove. High Exarch Thalcora sat upon the throne of silence, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the holographic projection of the galactic arm that hovered in the center of the room, a swirling vortex of azure and violet light representing the undisputed territory of the Dominion. But there, on the very fringe, a ragged scar of dull crimson pulsed with an irritating irregularity, the Terran Coalition. They were a smudge on the perfection of the map, a discordant note in the symphony of the Ethelgard's order, and for the last 3 cycles they had been the sole subject of the Synod's debates. Thalcora shifted his weight, his chitinous armor scraping softly against the throne, a sound that echoed like a thunderclap in the terrified silence of the hall. He looked down at the assembled council of peers, beings of immense power and lineage who now squirmed like larvae exposed to the harsh sun, waiting for his judgment. The debate had raged for hours, circular and exhausting, fueled by the peculiar and frustrating nature of the humans, a species that refused to fit into the grand taxonomy of the galaxy, a species that bowed when they should have fought and negotiated when they should have fled. "They are stalling, High Exarch," hissed Subcommander Vrex, his mandibles clicking in agitation, his voice amplified by the acoustic perfection of the chamber so that it seemed to originate from the walls themselves. Vrex was a creature of war, his carapace scarred from the suppression campaigns in the lower sectors, and he possessed the soldier's disdain for ambiguity. He gestured a clawed hand toward the crimson smudge on the map. "For 6 rotations, we have demanded the cession of the helium-3 refineries in the Proxima Belt. For 6 rotations, they have sent diplomats. They have sent poets. They have sent gifts of organic compounds and historical data archives. They smile. They apologize. They speak of mutual benefit and long-term stability. But they do not yield. It is an insult to the throne. They mistake our patience for weakness, and in doing so, they mock the very foundations of the Dominion. A species that does not understand the language of force has no place in the hierarchy of the stars. We must burn their outer colonies. We must show them the color of their own blood so they might finally understand the galaxy they inhabit." A murmur of assent rippled through the chamber, a low chittering of agreement from the militarist faction, but it was cut short by the smooth, melodic voice of Lyra, the High Seer of the diplomatic corps. She stood tall and slender, her skin translucent and shimmering with bioluminescent patterns that betrayed her emotional state, currently a cool, logical blue. "Violence is the tool of the desperate, Subcommander," she said, her voice drifting like smoke. "The humans are not stalling out of arrogance. They are stalling out of fear. Look at their vessels, blocky, utilitarian, lacking in the elegance of warp field geometry. Their shields are primitive modulations of magnetic fields. Their kinetic weaponry is laughable compared to our plasma lances. They negotiate because they know they cannot win. They are children playing in the den of wolves, trying to talk their way out of being eaten. If we strike now, we destroy a potential workforce. We destroy an entire civilization that, while primitive, possesses a certain resilience. They are industrious. They are adaptable. If we guide them, break their spirit gently, they could serve the Dominion far better as a client species than as a cloud of radioactive ash." Thalcora listened, his mind drifting back to the first contact reports. The humans had been encountered drifting in the void, their signals chaotic, their transmissions a cacophony of noise and music. They had been terrified. That was the consensus. When the Dominion dreadnoughts had overshadowed their tiny exploratory vessels, the humans had immediately opened channels of peace. They had practically begged for non-aggression pacts. Over the decades, they had accepted unequal trade deals, ceded mining rights to uninhabitable moons, and allowed Dominion inspectors to walk the halls of their stations. They were the perfect prey, soft, compliant, eager to please. And yet there was something about them that unsettled the High Exarch. It was their eyes. When the Dominion inspectors returned, they spoke of the humans' eyes, binocular, predatory, forward-facing, yet filled with a strange, flat calm. They did not look at the floor like a conquered species should. They looked at the inspectors. They watched. They recorded. They smiled, but the smile never reached those watching eyes. It was a discrepancy that Thalcora could not reconcile with the data. The logic of the universe dictated that the weak feared the strong and the strong ruled the weak. The humans acted like the weak, but they did not smell of fear. They smelled of waiting. "Time for debate is ended," Thalcora announced, his voice a deep resonance that vibrated in the chest cavities of every being in the hall. The holographic map flared, the crimson smudge glowing brighter. "We have given them the grace of our patience. We have allowed them to exist on our borders, to breathe our air, to trade in our markets. And how do they repay us? With bureaucracy, with delay. Today, the ultimatum expires. They have refused the final transfer of the Proxima systems. They claim." Thalcora paused, a flicker of amusement crossing his features. "They claim that the systems are sovereign territory under the protection of the Terran Coalition, and that any aggression will be met with appropriate measures. Appropriate measures, from a species that still uses chemical propellants for their small arms." A ripple of laughter, dark and cruel, moved through the assembly. The idea was absurd. It was the defiance of a microbe against a supernova. "Bring up the feed," Thalcora commanded. "The Terran ambassador is waiting in the antechamber. Let us hear his final excuse before we launch the fleet." The massive doors of the Grand Synod groaned open, the sound echoing like the ceiling of a tomb. The light from the hallway spilled in, blindingly white against the darkness of the chamber, and a solitary figure walked through. It was the human ambassador Elias Thorne. He was small compared to the towering forms of the Ethelguard, encased in a simple suit of gray synthetic fabric, unarmored, unadorned save for a small lapel pin bearing the golden laurel of his government. He walked with a limp, using a simple cane of polished wood, the tap-tap-tap of the ferrule against the obsidian floor the only sound in the vast room. He did not look up at the soaring vaulted ceiling. He did not gape at the floating statues of the ancestors. He walked straight to the center of the room, stopped before the throne of silence, and waited. He looked tired. That was the first thing Thalcora noticed. The human looked incredibly, profoundly weary. There were deep lines etched into his pale skin, and his hair was the color of iron. He did not bow. He simply stood there, leaning heavily on his cane, looking up at the High Exarch with an expression that was not defiance nor fear, but a strange, sad pity. "Ambassador Thorne," Thalcora boomed, enjoying the way the human flinched slightly at the volume. "You stand before the High Synod of the Ethelguard Dominion. The deadline has passed. The transfer codes for the Proxima refineries have not been received. Explain this failure or prepare your people for the consequences." Thorne cleared his throat. It was a wet, human sound, biological and gross in the sterile perfection of the hall. "High Exarch," Thorne began, his voice soft, requiring the audio sensors to amplify it to be heard. "We have not sent the codes because we cannot. The Proxima systems are home to 4 million human families. They are not mining outposts. They are homes. We cannot sign away the lives of our people. We have offered you alternative resources. We have offered you trade routes. We have offered you heavy metals from the outer rim. We have tried for 20 years to be good neighbors." "Neighbors?" Subcommander Vrex spat, stepping forward from the circle of peers. "You are not neighbors. You are squatters. You exist because we allow it. You breathe because we have not yet decided to suffocate you. Do you think your trade routes matter to us? Do you think your heavy metals are anything we cannot take by force? You are a resource, human, nothing more. And a resource that refuses to be harvested is a resource that must be purged." Thorne looked at Vrex, his eyes steady. "Is that the decision of this council? Truly, you view us only as something to be used or destroyed." "We view you as you are," Thalcora said, leaning forward. "Insignificant, you speak of homes, we speak of empire. The scale of our existence is beyond your comprehension. We have crushed civilizations older than your sun. We have terraformed worlds that were burning hellscapes into paradises for our kin. What is humanity compared to the Ethelguard? You are a flash in the pan, a momentary spark, and you have become annoying. Submit, ambassador, send the codes. Kneel before the throne, and perhaps we will leave Earth intact as a reservation. Refuse, and the war begins immediately." Thorne closed his eyes. He let out a long, slow breath, his shoulders sagging as if a great weight had been placed upon them. For a moment he looked almost fragile, a gust of wind away from collapsing. The chamber was silent, the aliens savoring the moment of total capitulation. They expected him to beg. They expected him to fall to his knees and weep for mercy. Instead, Thorne opened his eyes, and the pity was gone. In its place was something cold, something ancient. The weariness remained, but it had hardened, calcified into a resolution that felt sharper than the edge of a molecular blade. He straightened his spine, ignoring the pain in his leg, and lifted his head high. When he spoke, his voice was different. It was no longer the soft, diplomatic tone of a man seeking compromise. It was the flat, monotone voice of a man reading an autopsy report. "We tried," Thorne said. The amplification system caught the change in his tone, broadcasting the utter lack of emotion to every corner of the room. We really, truly tried. We swallowed every insult. We paid every bribe. We backed down from every border dispute. We let you think we were weak because we wanted to believe that if we were just nice enough, just passive enough, you would leave us alone. We wanted to believe that diplomacy was possible. We wanted to believe that you were better than this. You dare lecture us? Vrex roared, his combat instincts flaring. You are weak, you are prey. We are not weak, Thorn said, and for the first time he smiled. It was a terrifying expression, baring teeth not in joy, but in a primal snarl of aggression that triggered deep-seated instincts in the reptilian hindbrains of the Ethelguard. We are restrained. There is a difference. You mistake patience for inability. You mistake ethics for cowardice. You look at our ships and see blocks of steel and think us primitive. You didn't ask why they were built that way. You didn't ask why our shields cycle on magnetic frequencies. You didn't ask because you were too busy admiring your own reflection. Thorn reached into his pocket. A dozen guards raised their weapons, plasma coils whining as they charged. Thorn ignored them. He pulled out a simple, old-fashioned pocket watch. He clicked it open, glanced at the face, and then snapped it shut. You said that if we refused, the war would begin immediately, Thorn said softly. You were right. He tapped the cane against the floor, once hard. The lights went out. Not just the lights in the chamber. The holographic map flickered and died. The ambient hum of the atmospheric recyclers cut out. The low thrum of the Citadel's gravity generators ceased, leaving the High Lords floating a few inches off their seats in sudden, nauseating microgravity. The darkness was absolute, save for the emergency chemical lights that cracked to life on the human suit, bathing Thorn in a harsh, eerie green glow. What have you done? Thalcora bellowed, his voice cracking with sudden, irrational panic. Guards, seize him. Your guards cannot move, Thorn said calmly. Their armor is servo-assisted. We just broadcast a kill code on the carrier wave of your internal communications network. Their suits are now coffins. They are locked in place. Impossible, Vrex screamed, struggling against the sudden weightlessness clawing at the air. Our encryption is perfect. Our firewalls are impenetrable. Your encryption is based on prime number factorization, Thorn said, his voice echoing in the dark. We solved that mathematics 300 years ago. We didn't use it against you because we didn't want to cripple your economy. We didn't want to hurt you, but you didn't leave us a choice. A massive holographic screen on the far wall, powered by an independent reserve, flickered to life. It was not an Ethelguard display. It was human. The resolution was crisp, hyperreal, showing the space outside the Citadel. The Dominion Armada was there. Thousands of sleek, teardrop-shaped warships, the pride of the galaxy, the hammer that had crushed 100 worlds. They were drifting. Their running lights were dead. Their engines were dark. They were floating derelicts, turning slowly in the void. And then space tore open. It didn't shimmer with the graceful warp entry of the Dominion. It shattered. Reality itself seemed to scream as jagged, brutal fissures of white energy ripped through the vacuum. From these wounds in the universe, the Terran fleet emerged. They were not the clumsy trading vessels the Ethelguard had mocked. These were Leviathans, massive, predatory shapes of matte black composite, angular and sharp, bristling with weapon arrays that defied conventional physics. They did not have glowing exhaust ports or elegant fins. They were bricks of death, silent and cold. They dwarfed the Dominion dreadnoughts. Sensor readings, Thalcora screamed, but his console was dead. I'll tell you what your sensors would see, Thorn said, stepping closer to the floating Exarch. You would see that we aren't using plasma, we aren't using lasers. Those ships are equipped with singularity projectors. We can collapse the localized gravity of a target to the point of atomic compression. We don't burn ships, High Exarch. We erase them. We turn them into dust. On the screen, one of the Terran Leviathans fired. There was no beam, no flash of light. Simply, a Dominion cruiser, a vessel of 10,000 souls, crumpled inward. It imploded instantaneously, crushed by an invisible fist, reduced from a kilometer-long warship to a sphere of superdense matter the size of a pebble in a fraction of a second. The silence in the Grand Synod was absolute. It was the silence of a worldview shattering, the silence of gods realizing they were mortals. We stopped being nice, Thorn whispered. We said enough. This is genocide, Lyra gasped, her bioluminescence fading to a pale, terrified gray. You are monsters. No, Thorn said. Monsters kill for pleasure, monsters kill for territory. We are surgeons, and we are removing a tumor. He tapped his cane again. The screen shifted. It showed the Dominion's homeworld, the glittering jewel of Ethelgardia. A network of satellites surrounded it, Terran satellites having decloaked simultaneously. "We have seized control of your planetary grid," Thorn stated, his voice devoid of triumph. "We have shut down your military manufacturing. We have grounded your fleets. We have locked your financial markets. We have severed the command links to your outer colonies. The war is over, High Exarch. It took 4 minutes." Thalcora hung in the air, his limbs trembling. The suddenness of the violence, the total and absolute nature of the defeat was impossible to process. The humans had gone from petitioners to gods of war in the span of a heartbeat. "Why?" he whispered. "If you had this power, why did you wait? Why did you suffer our insults? Why did you let us push you?" Thorn looked down, and for a moment the sadness returned. He looked like a parent who had been forced to discipline a child he loved. "Because once we start," he said, "we don't know how to stop. Our history is written in blood. We spent centuries killing each other. We perfected the art of war before we perfected space flight. When we finally united, when we finally left our cradle, we made a vow. We vowed that we would never again be the monsters. We vowed to be diplomats. To be traitors, to be kind. We built a cage for our own nature, and we locked ourselves inside it." He looked up, meeting Thalcora's compound eyes. "You broke the lock. You poked the animal until it woke up, and now you have to live with us." What will you do to us?" Vrex asked, his voice trembling. The warrior was gone, replaced by a frightened creature in the dark. "Nothing," Thorn said. "We aren't going to enslave you. We aren't going to colonize you. We are going to demilitarize you. We are going to dismantle your empire system by system. We are going to install educational protocols. We are going to teach you how to live without your boot on someone else's neck. You will keep your culture, your art, your history. But your fleets are gone. Your armies are disbanded. You are now a protectorate of the Terran coalition." "You cannot manage an empire this size," Thalcora argued weakly. "The logistics, the bureaucracy." "We possess artificial intelligences that can simulate the economic output of a galaxy in a nanosecond," Thorn dismissed. "Your bureaucracy is a rounding error to our systems. We have been running your network for the last hour, and efficiency has already improved by 40%. The lights flickered back on. Gravity returned, gently depositing the High Lords back into their seats. The holographic map reappeared, but it was different. The azure vortex of the Dominion was gone. The map was now a uniform, calm white, the color of the coalition. Thorn turned to leave. He didn't gloat. He didn't demand a surrender ceremony. He simply turned his back on the most powerful beings in the sector as if they were already irrelevant. "Wait," Thalcora called out. The High Exarch sounded broken, small. You said you were nice to protect us from you, but your ships, your weapons, you prepared them, you built them, you were planning this." Thorn stopped at the door. He didn't turn around. "We are humans, High Exarch. We always prepare for war. We pray we never have to fight it, but we never, ever forget how to win it." The occupation, if it could be called that, was strangely silent. There were no boots on the ground, no Terran flags planted in the burning ruins of cities. Instead, the sky was simply filled with the silent, brooding shapes of the Terran Guardians. The Dominion's economy didn't collapse, it stabilized. The corruption that had rotted the outer sectors was excised with surgical precision by algorithms that tracked every credit and every resource. Food distribution became equitable overnight. The slave castes of the Dominion's client species were freed, not by decree, but by the sudden obsolescence of their labor due to Terran automation technology that was freely given. For the average citizen of the Ethelgard, life actually improved. But for the ruling class, for the proud warriors and the arrogant lords, it was a living hell. They were stripped of their power, ignored by the new administration, and forced to watch as their glorious empire was transformed into a functioning, egalitarian society. The humiliation was absolute because it was so quiet. The humans didn't shout. They didn't parade. They just fixed things. They walked through the streets of the capital with that same terrifying calm, nodding politely to the former masters, their eyes seeing everything, judging everything. 6 months after the incident at the Synod, High Exarch Thalcora requested a private audience with Ambassador Thorn. The meeting took place not in the Grand Chamber, but in a small observation deck overlooking the shipyard where the Dominion fleet was being dismantled. The massive hulls of the dreadnoughts were being sliced apart by laser cutters, the metal repurposed for civilian infrastructure. Thorn was there, looking out at the sparks falling like rain in the vacuum. He looked less tired now, but more solemn. "You wish to speak, Citizen Thalcora?" Thorn asked. He used the egalitarian title, a subtle reminder of the new order. "I have watched you," Thalcora said, standing beside the human. The exarch had shed his ceremonial armor for a simple tunic. He felt naked but lighter. "I have watched your people. You are efficient. You are just. You are everything we pretended to be, but I still do not understand one thing." "Ask," Thorn said. "The level of your technology," Thalcora said, gesturing to the shipyard. "The gravity drives, the quantum computing, the matter synthesizers. You are thousands of years ahead of us. Thousands. You could have ruled the galaxy centuries ago. You could have been gods. Why did you hide in the mud? Why did you pretend to be a Tier 2 civilization when you are clearly Tier 5 or higher? It defies logic. No species hides its strength unless." Thalcora trailed off, a cold realization dawning on him. Thorn turned away from the window. The look in his eyes was back, that ancient, deep sadness mixed with a terrifying resolve. "Unless they are hiding from something else," Thorn finished. The silence that stretched between them was heavier than the one in the Grand Synod. It was the silence of the grave. "Come with me," Thorn said. He led the former exarch to a secure terminal at the back of the room. He placed his hand on the scanner and the screen flared to life. It displayed a star chart but not of the local sector. It was a map of the entire galaxy and the void beyond it. "We didn't expand because we were afraid of you," Thorn said softly. "We didn't expand because we were trying to be quiet." He tapped a key. The map zoomed out to the intergalactic void, the great emptiness between the Milky Way and Andromeda. 300 years ago, our deep-range listening posts picked up a signal," Thorn explained. "It wasn't a communication, it was an echo, a scream. We analyzed the trajectory. It was coming from a cluster of galaxies roughly 50 million light-years away. We sent probes, faster-than-light probes with stealth drives." Thorn paused, his face pale. "The probes didn't find the galaxies." Thalcora stared at the screen. "What do you mean?" "They were gone," Thorn whispered. "Consumed, the stars were extinguished, the matter was harvested, entire civilizations, billions of worlds wiped out, and the thing that did it, it's moving, it's a swarm. A biological imperative on a cosmic scale. They don't conquer, they eat. They consume energy, they consume biomass, they consume light." He pointed to a red vector line, slowly creeping toward the Milky Way. "They are attracted to high-energy signatures," Thorn said. "They hunt by detecting the warp wakes of advanced empires. They look for the noise of civilization. That is why we stayed small. That is why we dampened our output. That is why we tried to keep the galaxy quiet. We were trying to hide, Thalcora. We were trying to hide all of us." Thalcora felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. "And the Dominion." "You were loud," Thorn said, his voice hard. "You were so incredibly, stupidly loud. Your inefficient engines, your constant wars, your unshielded communications. You were lighting a bonfire in a dark forest filled with wolves. We tried to tell you. We tried to guide you to quieter technologies through trade. We tried to get you to calm down diplomatically. But you wouldn't listen. You just kept screaming into the dark." Thorn looked back out the window at the dismantling fleet. "When you threatened us, we had a choice. We could let you destroy us and then watch as you inevitably drew the swarm here a few centuries later. Or we could stop being nice. We could take control, shut down your noisy engines, silence your fleets, and unify the galaxy under a single, disciplined, silent defense grid." "So this," Thalcora gestured to the occupation, to the dismantling of his life's work. "This is not a conquest." "No," Thorn said, "this is a fortification." The human pressed a button, and the screen changed again. It showed the new Terran designs, massive planetary shields, Dyson swarms designed to cloak entire stars, weapons capable of firing into the intergalactic void. "We revealed ourselves because we ran out of time," Thorn said. "The swarm is changing course. They have heard us. The war with the Dominion was necessary to clear the board. The real war, the war for survival, is just beginning." Thalcora looked at the human, really looked at him for the first time. He saw the burden that the species carried, the knowledge of the impending doom, the terrible responsibility of being the only adults in a room full of children, forcing them to be quiet before the monster under the bed woke up. The arrogance of the Dominion crumbled into dust, replaced by a profound, shaking awe. The humans hadn't been weak. They had been holding the door shut. "What do you need?" Thalcora asked. His voice was steady. The petty politics of the Synod were gone. The survival of the species was all that remained. "My people, we are strong workers. We are disciplined. We will not be useless." Thorn nodded, a flicker of respect crossing his face. "We need your industrial capacity. We need your soldiers, but retrained, disciplined, fighting with cold logic instead of hot rage. We need the Ethel Guard to stand with us, not as masters, not as servants, but as the shield brothers you claim to be in your myths. Thorn extended a hand. It was a human gesture, strange and alien to the insectoid Ethel Guard, but Thalcora understood it. The silence is over, Thorn said. Now we prepare for the storm. Thalcora reached out his clawed hand and grasped the human's soft, fleshy palm. It felt fragile, yet beneath the skin, he could feel the bone, hard and unyielding as iron. Command us, Thalcora said. Thorn turned back to the void, his eyes reflecting the distant, uncaring stars. Get your engineers, the human ambassador said, his voice ringing with the authority of a species that had looked into the abyss and sharpened its blade. We have a galaxy to fortify, and we are 40 years behind schedule. The war that began immediately had ended the Dominion, but the alliance that rose from its ashes was forged in the cold truth of the universe. In the face of the dark, kindness is a luxury, but unity is a necessity. The humans had stopped being nice. Now they were simply ready. And as the distant stars began to wink out one by one in the intergalactic void, the galaxy fell silent, waiting, watching, and for the first time hoping, under the watchful, terrifying gaze of the children of Earth.